presentation on the budget. He is discussing the details of that. Uh, and so we would like you to hear that firsthand as our program this evening. So, Kenny, maybe we can start. I don't see the link to GIS yet. Maybe we can start and hopefully they can patch. And hopefully technology works with us this evening, Kenny.
Yes, I'm sure it will. Welcome to the listeners, and hello, Sam. It's been a while since I've seen you. Well, in the flesh, anyway. Um, yes, it's today's budget day. I haven't had a chance, to be honest, to have reviewed the budget document, so I can't speak authoritatively on anything that's in it per se. I've glanced through it, and obviously the whole exercise of going through the budget estimates, etc., is another thing altogether. There are some things that I heard. I heard that there was further incentives for yachties and boating people. So there's some people who are enthusiastic about that, and I think trying to explain this to people and understanding the benefit for people who want to get into the pleasure boat business and the yachting industry is very important. Um, there has been some talk about the airport, the international airport. The contractor was announced today, so that's a positive move. And trying to explain how, even though we did it, I think last week, how this contractor works in tandem with the developer and what is the difference and why is it important that the contractor was named and how does that impact the entire development of the airport. So there's a number of things that I assume will be discussed on the GIS show, and that people should have their own questions. And I think, Sam, one of the things that we want to encourage people to do, and a lot of people don't do it, is to read the budget.
Mm-hmm.
People take sound bites. Someone comes on a radio station like we do and tries to interpret the data for them or
Mm-hmm.
interpret the stance or the measures that are being taken. It's good for people to actually download the budget from online. It's usually available a day or two after. I think it's probably available even from tonight, but most surely from tomorrow. Download that, go to the budgets and estimates, look through it. In many ways, compared to the last one as well, so that you have a good baseline of what was promised the year before. I often hear people saying, "Well, this is the same thing regurgitated." Well, you have a chance and an opportunity to look at the baseline from the last year and even the year before, and look at the data and see what it says. And then you can critique or praise the government based on what you really know versus what you might think or feel. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I think it's interesting point. I did read the budget. It's not that onerous a document. It's 59 pages, but it's not just 59 pages of data. It's interesting narrative, and it speaks to a number of things. So I found certain items quite interesting. Certainly, as you mentioned, last week we had Mr. Badwell and Mr. Johnson from the Airport Development Company, and they spoke about the airport. And yes, today we learned that the China Rail number five, the company, China Railway number five, was awarded the general contract to develop, to construct the airport. What this means is that, we now know who the contractor is. What's the significance of this company? As I suggested last week, and I did do a pre-budget this mini discussion with GIS this morning. I didn't know at the time. I hadn't been privy to the budget. I got the budget document after it was presented by the Prime Minister. But I'm quite pleased, quite frankly, that this company was awarded the contract, and I'll tell you why. It is based on the resources that the company has at its disposal. We discussed last week that the design of the airport was done by an American firm, Landrum and Brown. And the design and the architecture is one thing, but you've got to get someone to build it. We know who the developer is, and a major function of the developer is to raise those CBI funds to be able to fund the construction. But the construction contractor, this main contractor, China Railway Number 5 company, that's the people that's going to be building it. And, they need to have deep pockets, because this being a CBI funded project, CBI, revenues have been coming on fairly consistently, but there are factors, outside of our control when it comes to CBI funds, and we just don't know if things may slow down or how the fund cash flow may be interrupted. So it was important to have a company that have deep pockets, direct links to the Chinese government, that have, the capacity, even if the cash flow is slow, to get on with the construction and complete the project. And I think this is very, very important. They have done a number of airports in other countries like Dominica. They've done a fairly good job at that. So I'm, comfortable with their capacity in terms of technical capacity, but certainly their financial capacity and having the sovereign Chinese government behind it. I think that was a very interesting stroke of, I don't know if it's luck or genius or whatever. I'm sure these things were considered when the evaluation was made. So Kenny, I think that announcement, to me, as someone, in tourism and looking forward to the construction of the airport, I feel pretty good about this contract. I don't know what you're feeling on that.
Yeah, I think having a strong contracting firm is a very important thing. It's also, as you said, it's a multinational effort, because you have an American design firm, the Chinese contracting firm. Obviously, Montreal Management is based in the Middle East, between Middle East and Dominica, and then you have the Dominican government through the International Airport Development Company applying oversight, along with the Eastern Caribbean Aviation Authority, and ICOA. So it's with these kind of projects, there's no risk really to be had from widening the net in terms of the expertise that's available and watching over the project and delivering the project. So I don't see any downside in that.
We talked about the issue of inflation also, Kenny, and how that is affecting the average person in Dominica. But one of the things that struck my attention, that caught my attention in reading this budget, is that there is, modest as it may be, but relief for energy consumption. Certainly the smaller users, they're going to get some level of release of VAT, up to, I think, 150 kilowatts of use. I think that there's no VAT on that, and I think that's interesting. I think the figure the Prime Minister said is over 14,000 households will benefit from that. Plus, the government has completely removed the VAT on fuel surcharge, which is huge, and that benefits the small consumers, but it also benefits the bigger consumers, like restaurants and all businesses and hotels. And we talked about the enabling environment for business, and the high cost of energy is a major factor, a major consideration. So this doesn't reduce our power bill, by everything we want, but it's certainly a huge step in the right direction. And they gave an update on the geothermal plant that will be open in 2024, which is huge. Also, Padu, which is the hydro plant, is coming on stream next month. So we expect, at least in the area of energy, to see a reduction in some kind of relief, some modest stability in the cost, the amount that we pay for electricity. So that, Kenny, I think is huge also.
That is significant also, because government is taking a hit against its own revenue in order to make sure that its citizens do not get buried under the weight of operational debt, so to speak, within their households. I mean, that's very significant. The other thing that was significant was the announcement that the American Canadian or Canadian American
medical
university, as we know, Portsmouth, for all intents and purposes, is a university town.
Mm-hmm.
It's a university town that hasn't had its university,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a big announcement, because obviously there's still a lot of infrastructure in Portsmouth that is there, waiting for the university to open. And so that is something that I think has to be appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
The-
we're
If if I may, Kenny, there's some skepticism that I've heard about, because there may have been some false starts on the a new operator for the university. Sometimes, in business, there's trial and error. Everything that looks good on the front end doesn't always materialize as you anticipate. So I think one of the things that I just think our people sometimes are unreasonable about some of these things.
you know what, Sam? I don't think it's unreasonable, but I don't think it's actually, um, if you look at it from both sides. People talk about Ross University now, but for many years when Ross was in Dominica, Ross was considered, was mocked. And we must not forget that even whilst Ross, the main university, was went on to become a major success, we turned down Dr. Ross's attempts to expand both the veterinarian school and the nursing school in Dominica, both of
Right.
which
That,
now are in St. Kitts.
yeah.
You know, so it's not like we embraced Ross and Ross was a success from day one, and it took years to become what it was.
Correct, but I think my point was not so much Ross and even the others that were trying, but I think there is some special, it's almost, you say, legitimacy with this new company that was named. I know one of the directors was, I think, the head of operations for Ross University in the peak of its success. So I
But
think.
it's still, Sam, it's still a business risk. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Of course, of
we
course.
can still have another hurricane, God forbid, but we could still have
Mm-hmm.
another hurricane in this season. We can have a number of external shocks that can affect this.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is a risk.
Correct. So
And the
that's my
cynic.
point. That's my point because I've had Jungle Bay. We ended up very successful project, and we ended up losing that a few years ago. Tropical Storm Erica. So we have to kind of work with it. But I think these people are as good as we're going to get at this point, and I certainly, I know the government worked very hard to attract them, so they will do everything in their power to seek to ensure that there is success. But as you suggested, there is some risk involved.
Yes, and I think you have to give the government kudos for continuing to come to the table with different players, because it's not easy. It's not easy to get at this stage in the game a mature player to come to a small Caribbean island to
Correct.
start a university from
Correct. Correct.
scratch.
Correct.
And for those people who say that Ross University was some kind of deliberate um, exit orchestrated by the government, I've never heard anything more ridiculous. As you said, Portsmouth is a university town. Ross constituted a significant part of our economic activity. There is no benefit to Dominica to run out Ross. I think, as one friend of mine always says to me, Ross may have come to Dominica, but Ad Talem left Dominica. Ross didn't leave. It was a
Mm.
different organization, a different approach to the island. And hopefully, with this new university, we can do a bit more than just going back to business as usual. Because even though Ross were in Dominica, we were not necessarily putting the best infrastructure around Ross. And I think better can be done. Now that we have more of the hotels and some more facilities that can be probably looked at better, hopefully we'll be able to plan better for the future with a new entity.
We have a brand new hospital, brand new, well, not one new hospital. We also have a new hospital in Marigot also. Uh, I think this is quite attractive for this new medical school because all these facilities are open to them, and plus having the medical school is going to help as we build the medical infrastructure at the hospital. So I think it may be a good marriage. Let's keep our fingers crossed and be hopeful and hope, those persons that are empowered to do the work to make these things a success can make the connections, and it'll all end up benefiting Dominicans in terms of better health care for the people of Dominica, as well as the economic benefits that we'll get from this new medical school. But Kenny, I also read about the new housing initiative. And I think that this is interesting where the government is targeting young people in particular. It didn't give an age, but, I'm sure there's not discrimination against non-young people, but young people need housing, young families. And the government, I think they turned over 700 new keys is the number that sticks out over the past fiscal year, which is significant. And this is the housing that's done for people who are particularly vulnerable and unable to purchase. But what the government is doing now, I don't want to say shifting gears, but they're adding a whole new dimension to the housing in that they are assisting in subsidizing the purchasing of homes for young people, especially some young people in government service and other young people in the private sector. They're subsidizing the sale of housing for them, by building houses and selling it to them at subsidized prices. And another program is where they're giving them $10,000 to go towards of their home, which I think is significant, Kenny, because I know many of the other islands around, I hear the cry every day from young people. They cannot afford to live there. They cannot afford to buy a piece of land. It's outside of the reach of the local people because housing has gotten so expensive. So I think it's great that the government is focusing on housing as a basic need. And I think that's also good in terms of creating wealth for young people and a good boost for everything. If you have a good home, you can raise your children with more stability and they would probably perform better at school, and it's going to be an overall plus for the entire society.
Housing is a basic need. I think that's the first thing we will have to establish. And, we often underestimate how valuable it is when you compare Dominica to many other countries at the same income level and lower, and even higher. So it's a basic need, but it's also in many ways a privilege. And it's a benefit. I think that is something that has strategically worked out well for the island in terms of being seen as something that is necessary. I don't think it was seen as such by so many people in the past. And there have been complaints about entitlements and whether it is good to give people free housing, etc., etc., etc. But we now have the ethos being started in Scandinavia, for example, of the concept of a UBI, a universal basic income. And you have in places like the UK, you have essentially a welfare economy in which housing is a tenant, is a base of that platform, where people um, essentially who are unemployed get prioritized, especially women with children and elderlies, for housing, and they get paid a subsistence allowance. We're not that far yet, but given what labor is, and the government is a democratic socialist government, and that's what most labor parties in the world are like, and it's an offshoot of the British Labour Party. So it's no surprise that this happens, but it is good to see that it is following its principles as a political party.
Yeah, and they provide housing for people who, through no fault of their own, are unable to purchase, single mothers, and people who are, destitute or in not such great situations. But now they're also going after, other people who are coming up in society, and I'm particularly excited about that because right now, the young working men and women who are dealing with inflation, for instance, and the gap between their wages and what they can afford to buy, now they will be able to get assistance in getting housing. I've heard the negative and some very unfortunate, I don't even feel like repeating it, but I've heard you know, it's accuse the apartments, calling them ghetto apartments. That is so sad, you know, because, you know, you imagine you're going to go back to these very same people and ask them for their vote and their support. And you're saying they're ghetto people because they, you know, that's just quite unfortunate. Certainly, it is important with these new housing that policies be put in place and practices for good maintenance and to ensure that these apartments, you know, are well maintained and you know that the social environment is in place. There's sporting facilities nearby, and it's a good living condition. But I'm really saddened when I see people abuse other people and you know call them names or negative things. That should not be a part of who we are. That should not be a part of our vocabulary. And I think at least we should acknowledge that it's a positive thing to provide housing for poor people and for working people to assist them to at least have some stability so they can raise their families with some level of a starting point in life. So I think that that's a good thing.
Yeah, so of course, and having the multiple tiers is important too, Sam. I think the government are starting to understand that and are acting on it, and that's a good thing. And when I see the multiple tiers, if you go back to places that have welfare states, you have or welfare infrastructure, you have council or other types of housing that are for poorer people. But as they get jobs, people move out
Mm,
and they solicit a mortgage. And they also have what they call contributory schemes where the government contributes a particular percent towards the mortgage. They allow mortgage shares or the house shares. And so as people climb up, as people get more independent, they move out and get their own place. The idea that someone will stay in an apartment and as a child grow up, get a job, and simply want to stay in that apartment is a myth.
mm,
People want their own independence, they want their own space, and they may not want to actually move on to the same environment that they grew up in. They may want something better.
mm,
So, but it has to start somewhere. And many people, for example, who left Dominica, a lot of people, the diaspora, the numerous diaspora, never had their own place.
mm,
And it's one of the salutary lessons that you must learn, that many people are looking now from overseas and looking at people who are the equivalent of where they were many years ago, getting housing at a time when they themselves probably still haven't got their own housing.
mm,
So it's a big lesson,
mm,
and I hope that people see it as, I've heard some people, some of the most unlikely people saying, "Oh, yeah, the people are not independent, etc., etc., etc." The fact is, everyone in this world needs a leg up. You needed it, I needed it at some point. We're not. It's not about housing, right
mm,
now, for us. But we all needed a hand in some way or the other. And
mm.
when people get a hand like this, something as crucial as this, it should be recognized as important. The other thing I noticed is that they spoke about the infrastructure for the roads, etc., that are going to be developed or are in process of work. They spoke about the major road, the East Highway.
East Coast Highway, that's huge. I think 127, $137 million. That's
Yeah,
huge.
yeah. But
And that,
more importantly, it impacts the Kalinago community in
mhm.
particular,
The entire Southeast too,
the
Kenny.
entire southeast,
Up the Southeast.
and that is going to hopefully create kind of like the West Coast Highway effect.
Hmm.
Um, Unfortunately, with these things, I mean, people, once something changes, they never remember what it used to be like. I mean, most people go from Rosa to Portsmouth not remembering the pothole dodging we used to have to do. Or even when you passed under the cliff, the
Mm,
Kingston Cliff, you used to actually run literally just close to the edge of the water. Most
mm,
people don't remember that.
right.
So what happens every time the argument shifts? But whilst infrastructure is a, how do you put it, is a requirement of every government to institute, that doesn't mean that you haven't got to salute the fact that they're actually in doing it and actually following up on their promises. So this is a crucial road. The other The other road that I heard being spoken about is the the Grand Bay Road. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I believe the road to Grand Bay. I think that's on the British funded that project. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I hope that local construction companies and local workers get as much of a priority as can be in terms of getting work. And just generally the construction activity, which should help the local economy.
Mm-hmm.
If you put all of these things together, the construction of the geothermal plant, the work on the airport, the work on the continued work on the roads, um, and the return of a medical university to Portsmouth, it should bode well for the economy and for jobs over the next 12 months.
Well, on something that you're connected to, which is agriculture, there's also quite a bit of expenditure from feeder roads. I saw quite a bit of investment in infrastructure, even the renovation of the abattoir, and a whole number of initiatives in agriculture. I'm sure you haven't had the benefit of reading it, but I did, and I was quite impressed the investments that's being made in agriculture. And they want to select some productive farmers and support them in certain areas. I think 10 poultry farmers are going to get some huge benefits. And again, people, we all need a hand up when we're the ones receiving the benefits. It's okay. It's fine. It's good. It's helping us to employ people and helping us to whatever. And so we should be equally happy when other people, when we see some farmers who've been struggling get a hand, get an opportunity to, create a larger economy. Because at the end, the bigger economy, the less the stress is on each of us for taxes, because you've got a bigger pie for the government to get its resources, and there's more monies we can put into the necessary services. There's been some concern, even though our crime, our the crime rate is relatively low, and especially major crimes, but we see some signs of some things that some of us are not very comfortable with. The police need resources. Where's the money going to come from? Social services. We see people who are mentally ill, and we need resources to have proper facilities and proper care for these people. So we need a lot of resources. The government does, and that's going to come from taxes. And the government doesn't want to tax us in a way that it ends up depressing the economy. So hopefully the economy will grow, and the percentage we'll have to contribute to the government will be less and less, and the government will even be able to do more. So those are some things, Kenny. But I'd like to, maybe we'll take a break in a second, but I'd like to touch, even before we do that, on the CBI revenues, because that caught my attention. The actual CBI revenues for the last fiscal year represented 57% of the dollars that the government collected for recurring expenses. 57, and even for capital projects. 57% of the pot came from that, and taxes and other things. I think the VAT amounted to close to 20% of the about 15 to 20% of the balance, and the others are other taxes. So 57% came from CBI funds, and 43% from all taxes, including VAT and so on. And I think it's significant for the people of Dominica. You say we have very short memories. We need to be serious about this. This is a huge part of our economy, and a huge part of the resources that the government have to take care of the basic needs of the country. Especially, we're still trying to crawl out of this COVID economic meltdown, this global meltdown. So the government of Dominica has been able to meet all the payroll, to work on infrastructure development, to work on reconstruction post Hurricane Maria, which we're still dealing with. All of these things, they've only been able to do well. They've been able to do it thanks to the COVID, the CBI proceeds. If they didn't have CBI, it would be a very, very difficult hill to climb. And so, Dominicans need to be appreciative of the revenue of the Citizenship by Investment program, that the government have to take care of all of those needs. And we see so many of the of the projects. Some are externally funded capital projects through grants from friendly governments, through international organizations, but much of it comes from the CBI revenue, including, meeting some of the operating expenses in this very difficult time. Certainly the tourism number began picking up, and other numbers have started to pick up. The economy is looking upwards, which is a good thing. We're crawling out of this, but we cannot forget the importance of the Citizenship by Investment program and the revenue that has basically kept the island going in this very difficult time.
I think that's true. I don't want to spend much time putting a spotlight on that, because we've spent, in the initial days of this program, we spent a lot of time advocating for why it is that it is important for people to embrace this as an industry, a valid industry that supports not just Dominica but many other countries. And we must remember that. The other thing that you mentioned is that there are many other industries now that are growing on the basis that the money has been allocated to them. I mean, the tourism industry is a classic case in point. Yes, airlift has made a big difference, but if there was no Jungle Bay there, if there was no Kempinski there, if there's no Secret Bay there, then that airlift would not be bringing as many guests to come to this island.
Correct.
And so that's an important part. But there is another thing in all of this which we spoke about earlier, which is the airport. I mean, the airport, the benefits of the airport are going to stretch all across this country, and it is very, very important to remember that this project would not be possible without CBI. I mean, it practically wouldn't, because it would have raised our debt to GDP to unsustainable levels. And I'm pretty sure that none of the partner agencies that normally complement Dominica would be rushing to support us if we were doing a project like this under a loan, even if it was a concessionary loan at this time, with coming out of COVID, coming out of Maria, and then now coming into a possible recession based on inflation due to rising fuel costs and energy costs in general. So yeah, I mean, the whole CBI thing is important, but what's important also is all of the following projects and all of the things that are being generated from it. And I think what happens is that when you concentrate so much on talking about specific numbers and money, you forget what is actually being done around the country. If you look, the things like the health clinics that are being built, the fact that public officers have been, and I know that the people would like to be able to make more money. Everybody wants to make more money. That's something that is a universal desire. But the fact is that through Maria, through COVID, etc., that the public servants have continued to be paid without threat to their livelihoods and their careers, and that is something that it's the old adage, it could be better, but it definitely could be worse. Um, so yes, the CBI is critical, but I think what's also happening, and you've heard it, and I'm glad that the government seems to be putting an emphasis on it, because the Prime Minister has definitely spoken to it, which is that you have to prepare for a life after CBI.
Mhm.
Because if you keep on just thinking that this is always going to be there, then you have a kind of banana shock happen when the industry comes to a close, and then everything else shuts down because there are so many dependencies.
Yes, Kenny. So, listeners, again, you are listening to the other side of the story with myself, Sam Raphael, and Kenny Green, your host. We have a special discussion. Actually, we're supposed to be connected to GIS, where the Honorable uh, Minister Vince Henderson is doing a presentation. Somehow, technology has not enabled that, and so Kenny and I are just basically filling in with our interpretations as such in the interim. Kenny, you want us to go for a quick break now, and then we can see where we go from that? Maybe we can try to patch in. It would be great to hear.
Yes, it'd be great if we could hear something. So let's see if we can
Let's
go
see if we
for
can
it.
patch in the interim, and if not, folks, we'll be right back. Thank you.
Right, and I need to see the other side. So go and do like you do. I'm good to do like me. Ain't in a cage, so I don't need to take the key. Oh, damn, can't you see I'm doing fine? I don't need to see the other
Is this really how you like to spend your days? Whiskey, misery, and parties and play.
If I were mixed up with you, I'd be the talk of the town, disgraced and disowned, another one of the clowns.
But you would finally live a little, finally laugh a little. Just let me give you the freedom to dream, and it'll wake you up and cure your aching. Take your walls and start them breaking. Now that's a deal that seems worth taking. But I guess I'll leave that up to you.
Well, it's intriguing, but to go would cost me greatly. So what percentage of the show would I be taking?
Fair enough, you'd want a piece of all the action. I'd give you 7, we could shake and make it happen.
I wasn't born this morning, 18 would be just fine.
Why not just go ahead and ask for nickels on the dime?
15,
I do 8, 12, maybe 9, 10.
don't you wanna get away to a whole new part you gonna play? 'Cause I got what you need, so come with me and take the ride to the other side. So if you do like I do, so if you do like me, forget the cage, 'cause we know how to make the key. Oh, damn, suddenly we're free to fly. We're going to the other side. So if you do like I do, to the other side. So if you do like me, to the other side. 'Cause we're going to the other side. We're going to the other side.
Right here, right now, I put the offer out. I don't wanna chase you down, I know you see it. You run with me, and I can cut you free out of the treachery and walls you keep in. So trade that typical for something colorful. And if it's crazy, live a little crazy. You can play it sensible, a king of conventional, or you can risk it all and see. Don't you wanna get away from the same part you gotta play? 'Cause I got what you need, so come with me and take the ride. It'll take you to the other side. 'Cause you can do like you do, or you can do like me. Stay in the cage, or you finally take the key. Oh, damn, suddenly you're free to fly.
Okay, we are back on live. Kenny, I think you're with me. Unfortunately, we have not been able to link up with.
It's something that I live among the swells and we don't pick up peanut shells.
Be able to. Hopefully, Kenny, they will be joining us. As soon as they can. But I think you can carry on, Kenny, and maybe we can just go from there.
Yeah. When we
Read the budget, but
I think we're coming back to a major point about things like the budget, or the budget in itself, is the analysis misses usually one thing, which is what happens in the budget year, not just after the budget, but what happened in the budget year before. Usually, the only way for you to really get the real depth of what happened would be to go to the auditor's report. And luckily, the auditor has almost caught up with the actuals, with the actual budget. I think we're now like about 2 years apart, which is great. Most other Caribbean islands are not. I mean, St. Vincent are like 10 years apart between the actuals and the budget, which is kind of nuts. And Dominica used to be lagging much more. We were like 5-6 years. Now we're pretty much current. And why is that important? because the budget is an objective. This is what we're going to do. This is how we intend to do it. But something happens. It's just like you budget at your home. You put aside $1,000 and you say, "Well, I'm going to use that $1,000 to do 200 for groceries, whatever for what." And then something happens. You have a car accident. Someone has to go to the hospital, and you have to pay for that. You know, um, you know, Prices go up for fuel. So the budget is an intent, but it's important that people get into the idea of going to have a look at the auditor's report and seeing in previous iterations of the budget, like last year or the year before, whichever one is current to covered to current, what did the government say they were going to do in the budget, and what did they actually do? And that's how governments get rated, not just by us, but by the international agencies who often give money, loan money, grant money, because that's how they will either come back or that's how they will not come back. And I think it's important that people get into that discipline of not just looking at the speech and all of the regalia, the fancy hats and everything that people wear, which is all nice. It's all nice to have a little bit of pomp and ceremony. But the reality is what has happened and what is really likely to happen when a budget is read. And those are the things I think we need to get into. Just like you would teach, children about financial discipline and
Right.
learning how to be able to
Mhm.
manage their money. It's the
Mhm.
same way you would say it's good for them to actually read the budget and understand what was delivered with both their tax dollars and the loans and the other obligations that were made using the name of the government of Dominica.
Mhm. Yeah, Kenny, absolutely. And one of the things I think, it's good to educate the public, and I think that's what you and I have been striving to do on our program. I mean, nothing is perfect, neither of us are perfect, but we try to provide somewhat objective information to the public and valuable information that can help them to be, to be creative thinkers, to be critical thinkers, even more so than it's not just one-sided. Sure, we think governments print money and they can, but the money has to come from somewhere. And I think this is a basic fundamental understanding that people need to have, and there has to be discipline. You can't just go spending things if you don't have the means to pay for them. And governments, if they do that, they get into a lot of trouble, and you end up having, more difficulties than if they had some kind of, discipline in managing their funds. And I think going back to the budget, every year that I read the budget, uh, you know, I feel it's a good thing. It's a good exercise, as you're suggesting. How much money did we project that we were going to receive for the past year? How much did we actually receive for the past year? How much are we projecting to receive next year? And where is this money going to come from? And who's going to pay for it at the end? Other than, like we say, the CBI funds, it's us taxpayers that end up paying either duties on vehicles, or the VAT is a significant part, of our taxes. How much of it is based on, comes from income tax? I was surprised to see the income tax amount, which is really relatively small compared to other countries, because we have a smaller income tax rate than many countries, and a lot of people don't realize that. So people need to do their own independent research. They need to do reading. You don't have to support the government at all, but at least you can be an astute, intelligent, critical thinker that you're not going to let anyone, not someone in government nor someone outside of government, present you some information that's not correct, that doesn't make sense, and that you can't reflect on it and say, hey, that doesn't make sense. So, I may not agree with you on your politics, but okay, I understand, and that's rational. So I think that this exercise, having it in black and white, for proverbially speaking, or whether you have it on your screen, it's clear. You can study it, you can try to understand it, and from there you can think more intelligently. So I think, Kenny, you're correct in that. It's really helpful to actually go through the budget documents and to see. It's a good exercise for everyone, especially for young people going through life. That hey, you're a national budget. You got a budget for your household too, you know. And the same way you have to do plan a national budget, everyone should have their budget for their household and go through that not once a year, but maybe at least once a week, Kenny.
Well, yeah, it's difficult because we've become an oral culture. Maybe we always were, but we definitely. I mean, that's why we're on the radio. We're hoping that there's some people who listen to this and kind of think a little about some of the things that we say. Um, but we are definitely an oral culture. People, it's not that people don't read; it's that people there's a set of people who've been essentially mandated by the general public to read for them and then disseminate the words to them through media like this. And it's a bit dangerous because no matter who you support, no matter where you stand on any issue, if you don't interpret things for yourself, you are left at the mercy of someone else's interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
um, so it is good for people to, as I said, read the budget, look at the budget actuals. Well, the budget financials are extremely tedious. It's a huge document and it's extremely tedious. It would be good if the government would be able to do some kind of cheat sheet, or even a third party firm, maybe an accountancy firm or a consultancy firm, could print a kind of highlights document of the budget from the financials point of view, which
Right.
would summarize things for not just the average man on the street, because this is not an average man on the street issue, it's an everyman issue. So it would be good to have some kind of cheat sheet so that it can break down things for people. Um, but, you know, apart from that, the level of analysis of the budget in terms of really digging down into what has been accomplished with things is relatively low, and it's low because we like to touch on things like, you know, the CBI money and big signature projects like the airport, etc. But there are lots and lots of things that are covered by the budget. There's lots of people who work on projects, on tenders, on different things. The auditor's report is actually pretty cool to read because when you read it, you'll hear instances or you see instances where the auditor says, you know, I do not recommend using this contractor again, or you know, I do not recommend using this approach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm paraphrasing, by the way. I don't say that the auditor uses that language, but you can read between the lines in some of the verbatim that's in there. Or the auditor will give a scolding to a particular department for a procedure that it followed that was non-standard. And I think that's good for you to read the auditor's report and actually get a sense of what is going on.
Kenny, I read the budget as I said this afternoon. I read it once and then I went through it again. 59 pages of easy reading. It's not really, and I don't mean to put anyone down when I say it's easy reading, but it's not. It's very interesting narrative. Most of it, it's an interesting narrative flow. So I think people may look at the document and be intimidated by it, but you know, open and start reading page one, then you'll flow to page two, and you things that you don't quite understand and that you can ask a question about, but you can ask someone that you trust, you know, to clarify that. But you know, you should start, and it's not that difficult a document. What you're talking about, Kenny, I know in some countries they do that. Certainly, we don't have the resources like, say, the United States. In the U.S., you have the Congressional Budget Office that do all kind of budget estimates and do all kinds of things, and they function in a nonpartisan way that they can provide, you know, the lawmakers and the decision makers with basic information. Unfortunately, the United States is becoming more and more partisan, as we saw with, you know, with President
I
Trump.
mean, the Chamber of Commerce does do it to a point, but the
Mm,
unfortunate thing with even our Chamber of Commerce is that we often make recommendations to the budget, and then we gauge the budget based on whether those recommendations have been accepted or not. It's not that the Chamber of Commerce issues a review of
Entire
the
budget.
entire budget. And I
Right.
think it's a major flaw in the way we do things. But you're right. In Dominica, in many of the Caribbean islands, there is no independent body who looks at the budget agnostically. In other words, without a red or blue lens on,
Mm.
and to basically just state this is a budget that is fiscally sound, or it's fiscally conservative, or it actually is covering up certain things that should have been done a couple of years ago, or it is the first normal budget since Maria. There's commentary that can be made that is politically agnostic, but also going to guide people as to how effective or how promising the budget is.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and we don't get much of that. And that would help the government, to be honest. It would help the government. It would also help the opposition, because being able to listen to people, challenge the budget, and also talk to the budget and its benefits and its drawbacks without having any kind of leaning on the other is
Hmm.
definitely good for anyone who wants to be able to actually understand what is going on with how the obligations of the budget are being met. But we're a small country, and there is a pick a side mentality, which often has to happen with even things like the budget, which I don't understand with the budget. I can understand it for certain other things, but with the
Hmm.
budget, I don't understand it, because whilst we can give praise to certain initiatives, if, for example, all things being equal, something that has been promised to be delivered doesn't get delivered at all, and there's no explanation or no contingency or no compromise that had to be made based on other events happening, then someone should be able to say, well, there was no real good reason given for this not happening.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, I know we're deviating a little, folks. We started a conversation on the national budget that was read today by the Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister. It's a 59-page document. I don't think it's posted online. I had someone send me a copy after he did his budget presentation, and I was able to sift through it and to catch a number of what I think are some salient points in the budget, and to think about the implications. Kenny, unfortunately, you have not been able to go through it with that level of detail, but I'm sure
Yeah, I
you.
haven't. I will over the next couple of
Yeah,
days.
but to the audience out there, we want to encourage you, and as Kenny and I are suggesting, to read the budget yourselves. You're going to hear all kinds of commentaries on things. You don't have to be a bystander in a ball game. You can be a participant. Democracy is a participatory sport, and you have to be part of the team of participants. You don't necessarily have to always be partisan about it, but at least participate and get in there for yourself and understand for yourself. And Kenny, I mean, we're deviating a little, but again, we do these entrepreneurship programs. You've participated in some of them, and I've been doing this for a number of years. And the first thing that I tell young people that want to get into business, and they come with all these ideas and all of these dreams, and this is all nice and good and well, but I ask them to put it down in writing and come up with a document. You've got to come up with a document, because unless you put things, redo things in writing, even for your own use, you don't have anything to reflect on. You don't have anything to gauge, and we forget things. And also, it can help us to adjust and adapt. And sometimes we don't even see where we're spending the money. One of the things that young people end up, after I have them do a budget, I say, okay, before we start the program for the next week, I need you to, everything you spend $1 or more on, you need to document the date, the time, and what it is that you spend the money on. And every dollar you earn, you need to document that to see where your money is going, because a lot of people earn money and they say, well, they don't see where their money is going. And oftentimes, when they have an opportunity to actually document and see that, they change their lifestyle, Kenny. They didn't realize they spent so much money, wasted so much money on this or on that. I won't get into the specifics, but they spend a lot of money frivolously without realizing that that's how the money's leaking. And if you had some kind of budget, if we had some kind of budget, whether it's in the home to plan your purchases, because we know inflation is up there, and you have to stretch the dollar. It is important for us to practice, having a disciplined budget and trying to stick to it. And when we have to deviate, we can see, where we went south or how we need to amend it and so on to go forward. So it's important that we document these things and document whether it's plans or whatever, so that we can have something to measure, Kenny, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing you've kind of mentioned it in passing is that there's a whole infrastructure of people behind the budget. People see the budget speech,
Right.
but there's the minister, there's the Ministry of Finance and the Financial Secretary, who play key roles in compiling all of this. Then you've got all of the different ministries and all of the public servants involved who gather and collate all of this data, which turns out to be summarized in this speech. And I think we have to pay attention to even how the budget is collated, the different data sources, to understand that it's actually very complicated for you to fudge the numbers, so to speak, when people make accusations, because there's just so many people involved, and there's so much oversight now. This, you do have the Auditor General, but you also have oversight from all of the bodies who give Dominica money and who have loans that are owed by the state to them, because they examine the budget to look at the credit worthiness of the state and how it's managing its money. Just like anybody here anybody listening who has a loan or an obligation, every time you get money, people want to know, are you going to pay me? Are you going to do something with it? Have you made allocations for the next year?
Cash flow management.
Yeah. So that being said, I think we've come to the end of the show. Is it? Or are we still half an hour to go?
We still have half an hour
Half
to
an
go.
hour to go. I wanted for us to be able to look at also. I don't know if you've got the budget in front of you. I'm gonna try pulling it up. I wanted to look at passing, which is sports, um, and the discussion about discussion about the different facilities, etc. Now, sports is something I think that needs a lot more attention in future budgets, and I'm hoping. Part of the issue, obviously, is that Dominica spends so much time dealing with disasters and other mitigating circumstances that sports is one of the easiest things to fall victim to, that because it's seen as a leisure activity versus more critical things. I mean, when COVID is going on, who's thinking about sports? But I do think it's very important that sports becomes a lobbying activity, because you mentioned about youth crime. Much of youth crime is committed by young men, and there are two things that are linked to crime, not exclusively, by the way, but unemployment. All right, which is something that is a constant everywhere in the world, and also lack of sporting activities,
Or meaningful activities,
lack of meaningful activities.
for young people
So
again.
we have an infrastructure across the island. Whilst we're always thinking of all the big things like the Windsor Park stadiums, etc., or the national stadiums, and possibly building indoor tracks, etc., each of the communities, based on how Dominica, the urban planning for Dominica from the colonial days, each of the communities has a playing field. And I think government has to go back deep, dig deep into the whole sports planning to rehabilitate all of the playing fields to a level where they can, at least, if not be used directly for immediate recreation, that they can become useful community spaces again. Because those are the spaces that are going to allow people to have leisure activities, for people to go and take a stroll, for families to be able to go and get some exercise. And if it's taken piece by piece, I mean, everyone concentrates on as I said, the big venues, the Benjamin's Park, the Newtown Savannah, the Lindo Park, etc. But there's there's playing fields in every single community. And if I have to think of something that needs to improve, it is the rehabilitation of these facilities and the creation of more avenues for people to be able to do sports.
Well, you and I are business people, and I think uh, based on our life's work and our life experiences, even though we're not exclusive to business people, we also have to live. We have families, we eat, we like to recreate, we like to do things. But especially, I can speak for myself, and probably you may share that. We think of it, the budget from a business perspective, and certainly it's important because, again, we need to grow the economy. And if we don't grow the economy, we're going to run into problems and we can't do anything that we need to do. But there are so many other items, as you mentioned, sports and healthcare, that's so important, and education. There's a strong component of education in the budget, and even things like I saw an initiative for beautification,
Yeah.
which is important, very important in terms of the environment. We have so many, there's so many integrated pieces. I recently visited Bermuda, and I know I'm deviating a little here, which is an island very north of us. It's actually about 2 hours flight off the coast of of North Carolina, for those persons who are looking at it from a geographical standpoint. It's a small island, 21 square miles, but it's an amazing, fantastic. It's a British, a small British territory out there. And they have almost as many people as Dominica does, and it's 21 square miles, but it doesn't have the mountains we have. But one of the things that Bermuda prides itself in Kenny, is the stewardship of the environment. And I was quite impressed when I saw how well they're working with the little they have. And when you think of Dominica and what it is that we're doing, we really need to be more forward thinking and look at a holistic approach to life and a holistic approach to planning. One of the things that I saw in terms that struck me is they have strong environmental rules, environmental laws. A household, a home can only have one small car. You're only permitted to have one small car in a home because the government of Bermuda realized that the infrastructure cannot take the burden of having a whole bunch of cars to drive around. And how do they still get an efficient society? Is the island is a hook shape, and they have a very strong water taxi service where you can basically take ferries to go to different points, or they have a robust public transportation system with clean, new, spanking vehicles that run on time. Every 15 minutes, you just get to your spot, and it's subsidized. It's only $4.50 to get to anywhere from anywhere. And the tourists end up taking the buses and the ferries because it's so easy for them, and it's so and so we in Dominica, we have now, we have more disposable income. Clearly, I don't know if you know the figure, Kenny, but every month or every 2 weeks we have what they say a car boat that comes in with a whole bunch of vehicles, and we're piling on vehicles on the roads, and so we'd like to be able to sit down and have a national nonpartisan conversation on things like the environment and where do we go, where can we get consensus. We shouldn't be so divided as an island that we can't sit down, across red and blue lines and kind of come up with education. Where do we need to go, and how do we ensure that we're providing the opportunities, the right kind of opportunities. I saw someone talk about the lack of critical thinking in education, which I've observed, and I fully agree. The environment and some of these issues, Kenny, that we need to discuss as a maturing people without the partisanship. And this, I hear it in your voice, and this is something that both you and I speak about, as often as we speak, that we as a small island state need to be able to find at least something. We won't agree on everything, but Kenny, at least some things we should be able to set aside differences on and have some consensus and go forward. And the election time, fight the politics, that's fine, tooth and nail, etc. But there are some issues that are important for us to unite around, and we cannot be fighting every single issue on a partisan basis.
You know, we are where we are. I mean, Bermuda is a very regimented, very regulated society. It's almost,
Discipline. Yeah.
you say discipline. It reminds me a bit of this movie Pleasantville. Um, it really feels like you almost expect people to walk in lockstep, you know. And I'm not criticizing it for that. I'm just saying it's very different from what we have because because of the colonial model, they've been almost how do you put it? They've almost become a test case for how you create a particular type of model society.
Mm.
And for some people that's good, but many Bermudans will tell you they don't like it.
Mm.
So it's one thing or the other. But I do believe there are lessons to learn, and you mentioned that word discipline. It's important. The second thing is about
Let me touch one thing and then I'll let you know. Another thing that I have noticed there is the manners,
yes,
etiquette and manners. And
yes,
this stands out. And this is something that I think Caribbean people have been known for manners. When you went to London, I went to Washington to school. I don't know if you did the same thing, but I walked around and telling everybody good morning, and they looked at me like I'm a crazy person. Because around here, people don't go around saying good morning to strangers. And this is something that is so Caribbean. And unfortunately, when I look at a lot of our young people and not so young people, we're losing this etiquette and the manners. So I think that's something we can learn. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Kenny. You can go on.
no problem. Where was I? I was going to just bring up the point that where was I almost lost my trend. Okay, yeah, I was going to bring up the point that with the rest of the discussion that you were bringing up with regards to partisanship. Partisanship is not necessarily a bad thing
Right.
because within partisanship, people can reveal inconsistencies and discrepancies within a system. The issue is blind partisanship. That is what the issue is. And unfortunately, as it comes down back again to the budget, there cannot be any real discussion of the budget if, for one, it is perceived that you are praising the government too much, or two, that you're attacking the government too much.
Mm.
And so, therefore, a number of people just don't throw their hat into the fray to be able to actually make um, um, commentary on it or observations on the basis that they're going to offend one set or the other.
Mm.
And that's just the reality of what goes on in these islands.
Mm.
Um, However, we do have professionals who can be brought in and speak to this. I mean, we did not have much of a lead time for this show to be able to bring someone in, and unfortunately, we missed the feed. But it's important for people to always hear the other side of the story, so to speak, and the perceptions that tend to resonate about, what is being done with the state's money. And I often am curious about how people think the government is run. I mean, there's been a discussion about the lack of civics, but it's not simply that a minister says, I'm going to get X, Y, and Z done, and it gets done. There are permanent secretaries, there are people below them, there are officers, public officers who have a say. Sometimes the systems get intervened in and get interfered in based on some strong personality trying to buck the system, not just for bad, often for good, because the bureaucracy creates its own issues as well.
Mhm.
But it's not as simple as it seems. So again, explaining the budget below the budget would be a good exercise. Maybe it's something that should be part of the civics process, or maybe it should just be part of a regular discussion that can be had, rather than every year we get to this point and then we have people coming on the radio telling us what it is that they should think about the budget. I don't want to tell people what to think. I simply want people to go and have a read of the budget, look at the last auditor's report, see if you can find a match between some of the promises that were made or some of the actions that were supposed to be delivered, see if you can make a match with what the auditor says. And if you can't find a match, then you can ask legitimate questions, or you should ask legitimate questions.
Kenny, not to belabor a point, but again to highlight the hyper partisanship, the extreme partisanship that we have. We had a situation yesterday on this very station, Q95, where Matt, well, he called me in the morning and he was discussing and lamenting the crisis in civil aviation within the Caribbean. As you know, it's sometimes easier to travel, go to Miami to come back to an island nearby than to fly from one island to the other, because we've had a total meltdown with regional aviation for the most part. We do have in the Caribbean and Caribbean Airways and some of the others are playing, but it's not an efficient system. And so we talked about that, and one of the things that Matt said, and he just said it matter of factly, and I'd say this: Matt is not known as a supporter of the Labour Party government. I think we can agree on that. But all Matt said is a statement of fact that Roosevelt Skerritt invested money into LIAT to keep it going, in a positive way. And he got beaten up so badly on this very station because you're not supposed to say anything.
I'm sorry, I don't get that, because I didn't hear this whole thing. I don't get it. Why was he getting beaten up?
Because he said that Roosevelt Skerritt is the first prime minister to invest money in LIAT. Because what he was suggesting is that we should try to find a way to bring LIAT back, and we should have kept it going, which was his premise. I don't necessarily know if I agree with everything that he said, but that's what he said. And in saying so, he kind of, in a positive way, said, well, at least give him credit for that he invested money in LIAT. And people don't even, it's a statement of fact. It's not a statement of that Skerritt invested money in LIAT, so he's a good guy or whatever it is, but just a statement of fact that puts a positive light on someone you don't like. All of a sudden, people went ballistics. One caller even called 5 times, very angry at Matt because he got off script, because everything you say is supposed to be harsh, just total anti one side or anti the other side. And I'm sure, on the government side, there are some people who feel as harshly with respect to opposition, who have such a visceral reaction to everything that comes from anyone associated with the opposition. And I think that this is quite unfortunate, Kenny. And I know it's almost sounding like a broken record, but I'll keep saying it. We have to find ways to integrate and to cross the borders with our relationships and in doing business with people and so on, so that we don't become so balkanized in Dominic. And I just see this thing unfolding, and I don't like the way it's going. Certainly, as you suggested, we have our political leanings, and that's okay. That's fine. And you have yours, I have mine, the other person have theirs, the other one have theirs. And we have to respect that. And I'm not trying to convert you, and you're not trying to convert me. But at least there have to be certain things that are important to all of us. We do like, happy children. There are some things I think that we can agree on, that we want what's best for our society. We want less crime. We want, businesses to do well. We want certain things. I think there's some baseline that we have to agree on as a society, if we are to be a society, if we're not to be two societies just living in one geographical space.
Well, that's a wonderful a wonderful sentiment, Sam. But you yourself mentioned that the United States has become polarized to that a very deep level. United Kingdom is no different. You go through Europe, you go, it's really only in authoritarian dictatorships that you don't get that happening, which belies the entire commentary that this is a dictatorship. I often laugh when I hear that, because a station like Q95 would not exist if this was a dictatorship, and there would be no dissent.
Absolutely.
And it is a byproduct of the stakes being higher. What are the stakes? The stakes is that people are much more complicated than they used to be. People were simpler, Sam. People were happy with their lot, so to speak, if you've ever heard that saying. People were happier with their lot in the past. Now people are not, for good or gain and for bad. People are not willing to simply accept that them being able to have a living and to have a house and be able to eat is good enough. And so there are more demands in a more complex society structure. But how do you stop people being polarized? You can't,
I,
because as long as
can you-
there's
Mhm.
as long as there's a narrative, as long as there's a narrative, Sam. There's an old it's not an old saying. It's this whole thing. You've got no water, and your neighbor's pipe is flowing very strong. Your natural inclination is to think your water is not working because the neighbor's own is flowing stronger. And that's one of the things that has become pervasive in our society. I mean, people make all of these assumptions about you, about me, about anybody, because they perceive, whether it's because of CBI or because of how you might speak about the government, that you're getting something and that you've benefited, so to speak, so that you can never have a dissenting voice. But we do dissent, we do disagree with some things that the government does. It's
Mhm.
just that, like everything else, and for most people, if you don't understand that mantra, then you will never get it, which is that when you have any kind of relationship with someone, you tend to scold them in private and praise them in public. This
Mhm.
is not some kind of how do you put it? It's not kind of playbook of support for someone. It's just a measure of civility that you engage in when you have friends or you have people that you have some level of relationship with. And sorry to cut you again, Sam, but this whole idea about a polarized society, the society itself is just a reflection of how people are on the ground in terms of how they feel about each other. What you've had is a breakdown of relationships. You've got a breakdown of communities in many cases because, again, people are starting to look at themselves versus other people that they either grew up with or they know. People are measuring themselves against other people, not knowing what those people's lives are like, but assuming based on what they see that that there's a perception that that person is doing something that is not quite right in being able to be a bit ahead or have more or have perceived to have more. And Sam, that's not going to change. It's not going to change for a while, especially in a capitalist society. In a capitalist society, unfortunately, there's hierarchy. In a democratic socialist society, you can give poorer people housing, you can give people a step up, a hand up, you can send people to study, etc. But there's always going to be people who are feel that they should be higher up in the hierarchy and other people should be lower down. That's
I,
unfortunate.
I want you to understand, and I'm happy you and I are having a debate right now on this. And I just don't want what I'm saying to be mischaracterized. I'm not suggesting that there's going to be an absence of partisanship, but it doesn't have to come down to each and every breath we take, which is what I'm talking about. And I think there are societies that are not dictatorships where there is less partisanship than we are evolving into in Dominica. I don't think it was ever a time in Dominica when there was no partisanship, but at least there were some common values that people shared, and partisanship didn't come into the mix in everything that they did. And I don't know, I'm seeing more. I try to, people tell me I'm naive and so, and you try to live in my own space in a way that, my relationship are not going to be affected by this. And I know other people that do. And I just wish that more people, maybe not on everything, but at least on what about the environment? Is there some way we can find consensus that, we used to have environmental organizations in Dominica that focus on the environment, that didn't bring politics into it? Is there some way that people who are interested in the environment can at least have some space to promote that without partisanship? I know there, for instance, there's a wellness association in Dominica, and maybe that's an example. I don't think there's politics in it, but the way things are going, certainly, it's heading in the wrong direction there. And the fact that you're correct, the UK and the US and so have become and are becoming more and more partisan because they're doing it. I don't think, I think we can lead those countries. It's about time that the non-Europeans start to show, these Europeans at least a little something about civility, because there's, in the mind of the European, they are the champions of morality and all of these good things. And I think in some
That,
ways, societies, whether it's carnival, we have fun, we come for Creole festival, we come together, we do some of these things. And I just think that we can do more on some little issues, so you and I would probably agree to disagree on this.
yeah, I don't. I'm not saying. By the way, don't get me saying that partisanship is welcome. I'm just saying it's a natural byproduct, especially of capitalist societies where you have haves and have-nots. It 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 breeds that. That's how it works. And also, we're a perception-based society. People see you, they hear you. If they don't see you and they don't hear you, they may not have a perception. The
Mhm.
other thing that goes with that, and we have to be careful to not um, overrate what people say on the radio. I find that there is a kind of partisanship that comes from distance. But when you meet people, when you relate to them, when they come to Jungle Bay or you meet
Right,
them
right,
somewhere,
right.
you really speak to them. Their
Mhm.
tone, everything is different,
Mhm.
because then they're dealing with you, the person, as a human being, not as a detached person they can shout at, or someone they can create an
It's
anonymous
all
identity.
from a distance or on social media.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so there is all of that rah rah rah. I don't know if you've ever seen these videos where you have these two dogs barking at each other behind the gate, and when you remove the gate, they're like, "Ah, we're cool," and then you put back the gate again, and they're rah 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 at each other. There's a semblance of that in our society, but I don't think it will ever go away until you have a more egalitarian society. And how do you get a more egalitarian society? You get it by continuing some of the things that are happening now. You get more and more people educated, you get more and more people with housing.
Mhm.
And there are people going to fight that. There,
Mhm.
there are people going to fight that either from habit or because they genuinely see it as a threat to some form of hierarchy. And then there's the part that is really true, that they see it as a threat to their political party being able to respond to gestures like that, which create some kind of patronage system. And then
Mhm.
let's be honest about it. There is some form of truth in it, because there is this, again, this saying, never bite the hand that feeds you.
Correct.
And Caribbean people follow this. Last point, you you spoke briefly about the Europeans and the advanced and so on. Um, we are advanced in a different way. Huh? We are a zone of peace. Europeans killed over 40 million of each other to get to the point where they could be the way they are right now. I mean, not too long ago, too. And there have been conflicts. There's been conflicts and conflicts. And yes, there's been conflict in Africa, there's been conflict in Asia, etc. But we in the Caribbean have shown a level of civility that the rest of the world has not been able to summon throughout their history. We've managed to develop ourselves, even post independence, without major wars and genocides and slaughtering each other. And long may it be so. So if it means that people have to call and insult each other rather than pull guns and try and slaughter each other, then let that be the price that we have to pay.
Yeah, Kenny, we're going to begin to wind down. For our audience, we started by discussing the national budget. We plan to join Dr. Vince Henderson, who did the budget breakdown on GIS, but unfortunately, technology didn't allow us to join. So Kenny and I kind of filled in our friendly man-to-man discussion and debate on some things. And Kenny, I always appreciate earnest conversations. I learn a lot from you in our
And
conversation.
I learn a lot from you too.
And
I will say this, that hopefully um, the whole budget discussion, we can pull some things from the budget, not just in the next few weeks, but over the next year.
mm,
Not on this program specifically, but in general, to just be able to assess how we're doing. And the airport, of course, is a major milestone, but
yes,
there's so many things. There's so many other things. I know there's plans for tourism, rebranding plans and plans to expand the footprint. You talked about agriculture and the the plans for agro-processing. You talked about the yachting industry and how that's going to impact and have a chain-on effect for tourism. So you need to monitor those things. But again, I say to people, get the printed version of the budget, read the auditor's report, and appreciate that the budget is way, way more than the speech that happens every time of this year. It's a way, way more than that. And please don't let anybody, not me, not Sam, not anyone else, interpret data that you can go and find and interpret for yourself.
And Kenny, again, we have to emphasize we started on the airport again, as I articulated. That's the largest infrastructure development project in the history of Dominica, and it probably will be for a long time.
Mhm.
We have signed an agreement with the developer. We did that almost a year ago, I think, if I could recall. And now we have done many studies. We've had the Airport Development Company officials as guests of our program, and they've given us updates up to last week. And now we have named is the prime contractor, China Railway Number 5 company, and they are backed by the state. So again, I'm very happy that's the company that was chosen. The design was done by Landrum & Brown, which is an American company. And we want to emphasize because, some people are going to probably suggest all kinds of negative things because Chinese are building it. Sure, there's an opportunity cost for everything, but I think it's a good thing that we have such a strong company that has the capacity and the resources and the cash flow to complete this project. And I think that's a big, big plus for Dominica. Again, people, the budget is a living document. It's not something that is fixed, that is going to be like a Bible that doesn't change. You're going to have to look for opportunities and pivot away from the budget when you have opportunities. We can't predict, God forbid, if we have a disaster or something, then you can't stick to the exact budget. It's going to be a living document. So you look for both, challenges and new opportunities that are going to come over the cycle of this next fiscal year. And there's going to be some morphing and some adaptation and adjusting. So that's where the leadership and the management comes in. But at least it's a starting framework, Kenny, that the people of Dominica have that we can look on. And I'm not going to say if it's a good budget or if it's a bad budget. I don't think that's my place to say. I think for me, I'm satisfied with some of the aspects of it, and I'm looking forward, for the ongoing proper management of the country. But people, take a look at it and you decide for yourself what you think of the budget. And Kenny, I'll let you close off and then we'll take it from there. Thank you guys for joining us, and I'll turn over to my buddy Kenny.
We're pretty much up for time. Again, I'll re-emphasize what Sam just said. The budget is way more than the speech. Today, it is a living document. And all of the projects in there, whichever ones that you take interest in because of your background, some people are in the construction business, listening to this and thinking, how is the budget going to impact my life? How am I going to get a chance to get onto these projects? These are the other important things for most people is how is the budget going to really impact their life? How are they going to get a chance to get onto these projects? How are they going to get a chance to become a provider? Those are the things that are of importance to people. So over the next few weeks and months, I hope the government articulates a path for those people who want to get involved with the projects and those people who want to get into housing, those people who want to be able to get better health care, etc., as to how the budget impacts them and to make it a living experience as much as a living document.
Thank you all, and thanks for listening to the other side of the story on Q95.